Ladies and gentlemen, we're starting with a little bit of delay.
Worüber Sie sich bitte bei der Außenministerin beschweren.
And please complain to the German foreign minister about that. So I'd like to get started right away. Very warm welcome to the fourth Meet the Minister at the MSC, coordinated by the Metis Institute together with the Munich Security Conference. Today we have as a guest Minister Pistorius. We will have a brief discussion and then we open up the discussion to the audience. Due to our us being a little late, we have to keep a tight ship. So I will stop in an hour, no matter how many questions are left. Another rule, so to speak, please identify yourself when you ask questions. I know most of you here, but not everybody. And please do ask a question that is an actual question. Do not try to hold a lecture here. So those are that's the playbook for tonight. So, Minister Pistorius, you've been in office for 1 month, exactly. It's always been a special office, but since the 24th of February 2022, it's the second most important ministry that we have in the government. And in this month, you've had a busy time. You have the Ukraine Defense Contact Group, German, French Minister of Council, NATO Defense Ministerial, many troop visits, etc. And I'd like to ask 2 questions to start with. One is just out of curiosity, what's it like? So does your mobile phone ring and it says Olaf Scholz, you pick up and say Pistorius, and then the other side says, well, it's Scholz. Do you want to become defense minister? And you say yes. Is that how it works? Almost. Well, I had a meeting with the helicopter squad in Niedersachsen, Lower Saxony, and I heard my phone vibrate because accidentally I hadn't put it on silent, but I didn't look at it, because if I did, then I would have seen that it was the Chancellor, but it wouldn't have changed anything because I was busy. And I rang him back later, I didn't get through, and then he rang back again and I said, hi, Olaf, it's Boris here. And he said, yeah, it's Olaf here. And he said, he asked me the question and I said, yes. I am curious. I think it's important to know how you become a minister in Germany. But I guess not being a minister is just as fast.
Jetzt werden wir ein bisschen ernster.
So, let's be more serious now. You've been in office for 1 month now. You've had many meetings and encounters during a time that's incredibly important. What are your first impressions since you've been Minister of Defense? Well, there's not enough time to talk about everything. My first impressions were not surprising, actually, but I realized that I was working with an office, with a ministry that is motivated. They have a passion for what they do, and some people suffer, some more, some less, that their work is not being appreciated. And yes, it's true, for 30 years, defense did not play a big role. We talked about expeditionary operations, but the Bundeswehr was not really in the minds or on the minds of people. And the servicemen and women and the officers and those working in the civilian realm, they weren't really in the public domain, and I noticed that they want to get going now, and they gave me the signs wherever I went, and I tried to be very open and talk to everyone, talking to the lady on my floor who makes sure I get my coffee every now and then, or be it the Chief of Defense. So that's my approach to this kind of work wherever I go. And I learned very quickly, or I realized very quickly, that this ministry is huge. extremely big. And if you look at the organizational structure, for someone who's been through all hierarchies, all levels of administration, if I look at that organizational structure, it's super complicated. And it's something that we need to address. We need to ensure that we improve the structures there, that we ensure the chain of command, the decision-making hierarchy. For me, it's the worst if I don't know who's responsible for what. And yeah, we are going to get to work on that. All right, so over the next weeks or months, we can expect some reforms. Well, little reforms, maybe. Positive changes is what I'd rather call them. Changes that are hopefully effective. We have our daily work, procurement. I was talking to my staff at the procurement office, and I noticed there's this insecurity there. They were constantly worried about being exposed to criticism. Everybody's criticizing those who do procurement, and I wanted to look at why that was. And I won't go into detail here now, but I have some insights that are quite clear to me. It's not so much the external conditions, it's not the structure of that particular authority, but it's due to the processes. They are outdated. They come from a time when we had all the time, but today we don't anymore. So let's go away from the ministry. Let's talk about something else. As you know, next week is the first anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and of course it's been a huge topic here at the MSC as well. What do you think are the next steps? What's going to happen next with regards to Russia? Well, Russia is isolated. It's difficult to know what's happening domestically there. The intelligence services are not agreed on that either. I don't want to give a forecast here either. But now it's important that the Ukraine can win this war, whatever that means. We'll have to discuss that. But it needs to be clear that Russia can't be successful with this, with their approach, because it's not just about Ukraine. It's about all autocrats in the world who will try to do the same thing and will be emboldened if Russia is successful here. And so we are required to step up here, and just as the EU and NATO. Right, so a decision was made to supply the Leo 2A6 to Ukraine. There's a group of countries who are establishing, but how does it fit into the entire picture of support for Ukraine? I don't want to ask about the next set of systems that are going to be provided, but how will you continue military support for Ukraine? Well, I think the generals here will agree. It depends on how the war develops, what happens on the ground and along the front lines in the east and the south. So who makes territorial gains, who has certain losses, wins. That's what determines what happens next. I can't anticipate that. I may be able to prepare for some steps, but it's very hard to anticipate what's going to happen next. Well, during the last interviews that you've given, and I guess during the last conversations, you always talked about the issue of ammunition, especially for the Leopard vehicle. So do we need to create a system where, independent of what comes next, where we ensure a sustained support? It's not just about ammunition, it's about spare parts as well. Yes, it's not just about sustainable support for Ukraine, it's also to ensure sustainability in our own supplies. I can't separate the two, even though there might be a time lag between them. Now it's important to support Ukraine with everything they need, maintenance, material, etc. We can talk about that in a minute if you want. But then the next step, and Ursula von der Leyen mentioned it as well, we need a different system of centralized procurement. Centralized always sounds terrible. That's why I prefer to call it common procurement, sustainable single procurement with larger volumes, contracts, etc. But it's not something that we can implement now directly, but we need to put it on the agenda even if the war is over. We need more standardization. For me as a layperson, I can understand it if someone explains it to me, but I could never imagine that for the different Leopard types, we have about 5 different types of ammunition and need to stock that. Has to do with the age of the material and the different configurations. But it's easy to understand why it's difficult, if Challengers and Abrams and Soviet tanks are on the list as well. So for 30 years now, we were not forced to set up formations, but now we need a different approach, not just in terms of standardization and the development of systems, but when it comes to procurement as well. Right, you just mentioned it. What kind of ideas do you have for closing the gaps that are caused by the stocks that are decimated in the Bundeswehr? So we want to close those gaps as quickly as possible. Well, for 2 weeks now, in different interviews, I've been trying to explain that dilemma. Sometimes I feel that no one's listening. I keep explaining, yes, it is a big challenge to provide comprehensive, fast and effective support. Recently met some Eastern European colleagues and I was asked, why do I only provide 14 Leopard 2A6? And well, they asked me I asked them how many they wanted and they said all of them. I asked them, all the ones that work or all the others too? Well, all the ones that you have, all the ones that you can provide. Well, if we do that, they said, well, that would really help Ukraine. And I said, well, what happens then? And then they said, don't worry about it. Russia will not attack Germany. That's true. Before they attack us, they attack Czech Republic, Slovakia, and others. And if they do that, they will. Then those countries will phone us and ask, where are the tank battalions to protect us? And I will say, no, I haven't got any. Mine are from cardboard. So we have the challenge to support Ukraine. On the other hand, we have the dilemma that the defense industry cannot provide stuff. That's not a criticism. And maybe our stocks were not as large as they should have been. And now our stocks get depleted more quickly than we can replenish them. So there will be a deficit any which way. And so now what we need to be dealing with in a responsible way is how big can this gap be without offering us to vulnerability. So that's a challenge that we face, and it's not easy to solve because all talks with the defense industry, the 2 or 3 big ones that I talked with, they said, yes, we can do it. We need a bit of lead time, but especially we need contracts. I understand that. But during my first conversations about the A27, if I tell them, yes, you have the contracts by summer, please start now to order the components. You can rely on us. You get the contracts. And yeah, I think then it would work. All right, so let's look at the 3 big tasks that the Bundeswehr had to assume. So now we have focus again on national and collective defense. So what does that mean for the operational readiness of the Bundeswehr? Well, it's pretty easy. I've said it a few times now. Since the fall of the wall, since the end of the Warsaw Pact, we did not have any challenges of this size. Therefore, we made the mistake to get rid of army aviation because we needed to save so much. No one understands today why that happened. No one can explain it to me. Well, of course, they don't want to tell me. Or I have a personal interest there because that's where I did my military service. So now we have the challenge to increase all those capabilities again, but it takes time. We can't do it in 2 years. We need to set the right priorities. We need to expedite processes and procedures, and you need to have the money to do it, not just for 2 budget years, but I need to be able to tell industry, well, every year I will now order so many Leopard tanks, so many this and that, and we'll get a framework contract for different caliber ammunition, etc. So I need that for several years in order to increase my stocks and to re-establish national and collective defense capabilities. And that brings me back to the topic of Ukraine, because achieving both of these things, it's pretty difficult. So you talked about the defense budget, and I guess your finance minister is quite open for your arguments at the moment.
The question, he is open to it, but the question is, can he implement it? But I wouldn't want to be in his position, same like he doesn't want to be in mine. So it boils down to the challenge of filling a financial gap of 100 billion euros and other political plans that need to be implemented and need funding. Those are all conflicting interests, and I can only tell you, if you want to our defensive alliance and our country to be ready to defend itself, we have to take reasonable steps to support this financially. And if we don't guarantee that, we will be non-credible in our alliance. I just said, logically, at the moment we are focusing on national and collective defense. The past 25 years, I think, that was basically the task of the Bundeswehr. That was not so much the task, but instead international crisis management. Are we bidding farewell to international crisis management now because what the Bundeswehr can do is now focused on national and collective defense? No, and we must not do that. I am firmly convinced of that. We must not retreat and withdraw from international missions. That is not even possible. Germany is the biggest economy in Europe, and we want to, when it comes to defense claims and ambitions, we want to take a leading role. A quote-unquote leading role is a difficult term in German, but we all know what that entails, and that also involves taking on responsibility across the world. And just look to Mali or to Africa as a whole. We see Russia's ambitions across the globe, except in Northern America and Europe, and then there's Chinese ambitions added to that. So we need to be prepared, and we have to commit to the fact that we support Africa and the Sahel zone and not leave it to the Russians. So, looking at international crisis management, do we look at it through the lens, and this is not a criticism, through the lens of global conflicts between democracies and revisionist states? No, both comes together. The one thing is what Russia is trying to do right now, depending on how capable they are and how perseverant. But the other element is this: we need to make our contribution to the fact that these regions are being stabilized and remain stable. Some countries are stable compared to others, but at the same time, they can be drawn in politically that they're being destabilized. I had a very concerning talk with the president of the International Red Cross. She talked about the situation in Syria and African countries. And right now, we're solely focusing on Ukraine and on the eastern flank. This is understandable, but we are completely forgetting what is happening in Africa and all the misery that we see in Syria that has been going on for decades. And so we're losing an entire generation of young people who feel like nobody on this planet cares about them. And we need to be committed, because these problems will come to our doorstep. And we have a humanitarian obligation as well. Last question. So, buzzword Indo-Pacific. We had the frigate Bayern. The chief of the navy is here, and I think the chief of the army is not here. And the army, I think, will participate in an exercise with us in Australia this year. So all this is a huge logistics challenge. It costs a lot. It's resource intensive. Do we need to keep doing this? And can we keep doing this? Yes. Okay. So, well, then that's it. Well, we do have to do that. We play a role, we have to assume responsibility in the world, and we have to train and exercise with our partners. We need to perform, we need to show we're there. I talked to my colleague from Singapore today, and I told him that this year I want to go to the Shangri-La dialogue, which he greatly welcomed, because for a long time nobody really went there from Germany, and it's necessary for us to be there. We need to be able to act in the Indo-Pacific, also militarily. We have to communicate clearly that we care about the the region, also with a view to our American allies, because they too will focus at some point more on the Indo-Pacific region, and they have started doing that, which at the same time also impacts us and our needs in Europe to work on our defensive capabilities and our willingness to and readiness to be less dependent on the Americans. Of course, we can never do without them and want to do without them. Okay, great. That was basically the interview, quote unquote, that I had with Minister Pistorius, and I would like to open the floor now. There's 2 microphones in the room that can be brought to you, and if you want to ask a question, please do identify yourself and keep your questions brief. The lady at the back, please.
Thank you. I'm Daria Kaleniuk. I'm from Ukraine. Have a very quick question. When Leopard 2 tanks will be in Ukraine, and is it true that some things are happening at the border? It's hard to get them to Ukraine logistically. And second, very quick question. First of all, we are very thankful to Germany for finally unblocking this decision on Leopard 2 tanks, but we understand that there are many countries which can contribute. Could you give us a tip which countries you think could contribute more to Ukraine with Leopard 2 tanks? Thank you.
This is a very funny question, sorry for saying it, because since I came in office I always have been listening to that sentence, Germany was blocking, Germany was hesitating. We did not hesitate. We mindfully and consciously balanced our decisions. And I think this was right, and it will be right in the future too, concerning everything which might come. And to be frank, when I came in office and went to Ramstein on that legendary Friday, I expected, how to say, a unified coalition of nations who are sitting in front of me, pointing with a finger to me and to say, Germany, you have to switch the traffic light on green, and then we go forward with our 10, 20, 30 Leopards. I arrived, I entered the room, we started the discussion, and I learned very quickly from time to time, that this coalition didn't exist. There were some nations, they were very precisely saying we want to deliver Leopards. Not so many as I expected. Then there were countries that say we haven't even thought about it and even not discussed it in our governments. Others said, well, Germany is right, we should do that abgestimmt, coordinated with our allies. Okay, I left, and 4 days later, Chancellor Scholz announced we switched the traffic light on green for Leopards. This is now 3.5 weeks ago. And of course, some nations delivered or announced to deliver, and some others did not. And this is what I am a little bit astonished about, because this is a proof that we did not block anything. Obviously, some nations I would never name any nation. But obviously, there are some nations who just prefer to hide behind Germany. It is easy to say we would if you let us, and when we let them, they didn't. So it is not. It sounds worse than it is, because now we have a battalion of Leopard 2A4. 14 from Poland and 8 from Norway and 4 from Spain and so on and so on. And we have 17 Leopard A6, 14 from Germany, 3 from Portugal, which is a lot for Portugal. So we have 1 battalion, 1.5, almost one battalion and almost 20, something like that. We are working on further Leopard 6, maybe 3. I don't name the country from which it may come from. And we have the decision from Denmark, Netherlands, Belgium and others to deploy till the end of the first quarter of 24 around about 120, 130 Leopard 1A5. And this is a lot. And this will grow during the next months. And still, it might be not enough. I can't change it, because I can't force anybody to deploy or to deliver or to donate what he doesn't have or what he doesn't want to give.
Ich glaube, der Herr da hinten mit dem Voll.
I think the gentleman in the back raised his hand.
Stefan Detjen.
I'm Stefan Detjen from Deutschlandfunk. Minister, you said when it comes to support Ukraine, the focus is on Ukraine winning the war. So the next question that comes up is, what does that mean? So what's different in that statement to the sentence of the Chancellor who says Ukraine must not lose? And I think there was another event that I remember. I asked the military representatives who were here at the time, I asked them, can Ukraine win the war without modern fighter jets? So what does winning even mean, and what does Ukraine need to win? So what Ukraine needs to win is what the military experts should be able to answer. I'm not a military expert, of course. Excuse me, what were you saying? So what is needed militarily is not to be decided by a politician. If you allow, I can't do that. I can't decide on that. I'm not a military strategist, a technician. I can't do that. I have to listen to the advice of my experts. I need to listen to Ukraine, maybe, and watch what's going on in Ukraine during the war. And what does winning the war mean? Well, in my Spiegel interview, I was asked whether that's only a difference in semantics. I don't think that this is the case. This is why I phrased it that way earlier. Russia must not get away with that. And that's a very free way of phrasing that, but that's what it boils down to. Whether a war is won is decided in the end, at the end of a war, depending on how the warring parties, especially the party that was attacked, has defined what is still bearable for them. Ukraine may have position A today, and then in the course of the war, maybe Ukraine decides they want to use option A or option A plus or A minus. So it's hard to declare that, define that now. You have to think maybe with strategists and coordinate with the Ukrainians and decide what is acceptable. And in the end, I personally believe that there will be no winner or loser in this war. But in the end, we will have to talk about some way, shape, or form of freedom. People don't like listening or hearing that, but there must be some kind of peace, no matter how this is being negotiated and under what circumstances. And this is why Ukraine needs to be supported as much as possible and to get this into the strongest possible negotiation position, also when it comes to the territories that were occupied. Thank you. I'm Jana Polirin from a Berlin think tank. I have a personal question to you. So towards the end of the legislative term, you mentioned the enormous challenges that you're facing. So what is something that you want to have achieved? What should we think tankers measure you by when your term comes to an end? So let me add, how should the citizens measure you, and against what should they measure you? So the legislative term ends, I think, in less than 2.5 years if I do the right calculation. And so I believe that over the next 2.5 years, what we should focus on is this. We need to set the tracks for us to be on the right path. So the 2% goal needs to be anchored. It must be clear that we bid farewell to working conditions and processes and procedures and decision-making processes that stem from times where we didn't think of national and collective defense. So we have to be more effective and more and faster, and we have to continue with that approach over years so that we know what we have to do and when we have to do it to avoid a situation where we lose ability to act. And at the same time, and that is just as important to me as the other points, and there's more points I could list, it's important to me that the soldiers have the feeling that they play a role in political perception. It must be clear that the Bundeswehr is not, I don't know, I don't want to use a word that will be outrageous on Twitter. So the Bundeswehr is not just something random. That has been a concern to me for years now, because when it comes to security forces, the police or the Bundeswehr or others, we need a different mindset in our society when it comes to the relationship between many people in our society to this state, to this government and the state organizations and institutions. I like saying that, you know, I have this feeling, this sense, and maybe some people share this, I have the feeling that a lot of people think that things just exist, they just come to us and nobody is responsible and things don't cost anything and things don't concern them except when they call 911. or they call the firefighters, and they just appear. They're just there, and that's the issue. We need an awareness in the population that security is a basic need of people, and the state needs to guarantee that and provide that. But this needs to be going hand in hand with the societal consensus, because those who provide for security, they cannot be on the sidelines. They need to be appreciated, both in words and in equipment, for example. If we don't do that, then things will blow up in our faces at some point, and this is what I want to achieve. I want to lay the tracks and achieve that. So the tracks need to be set in a way that, regardless of who follows you, cannot get off of this track.
That's the bigger challenge, indeed.
Dankeschön, Herr Minister.
Thank you, Minister from the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. So you're opening up an equation. On the one hand, you want to ensure that the Bundeswehr is not stark naked, so to speak. On the other hand, you want to support Ukraine for as long as necessary. If you consider industry capacities and the available weapon systems, ultimately that means, and I exaggerate, that the Ukraine must not get the next offensive wrong, otherwise we have a problem, because the West will not permanently be able to support Ukraine at this level or even at a higher level. If you agree to that, what's your political deduction from that? Well, I take the easy way. I don't agree with your hypothesis, but thanks for opening that door for me. I believe that we can continue this support for quite a while, and we are doing things together with the defense industry. We are not at the end of our tether yet. We are only at the beginning of our possibilities. But I said in the beginning, we need a little bit of time to build that bridge, you know, to get to a point where we can continually build up and deliver. It's a question about defense industry capacities in Germany and elsewhere. And what I see is that they're working on it a lot. And I held a brief statement today, and so it must become easier to have exports. So exports must be facilitated. There's no other way.
Thank you. I'm Anya Manuel from the Aspen Strategy Group and Security Forum from the United States. The U.S. is working as closely as we ever have with our NATO allies, but if we're frank, and I can say that because I'm not currently in the U.S. government, our closest partners within NATO are the Germans and the UK. What can we be doing from the US side to work with you more effectively?
I have nothing to complain, to be honest. I have nothing to complain. The cooperation is really very, very close, very reliable and very trustful. So I have nothing to complain or to demand. What I wish for the next time is that we discuss the issues maybe a little earlier than in the past, together, behind closed doors, ideally, and frankly.
Okay. Da oben die Dame.
Over there, the lady over there.
Gesine Weber,
Gesine Weber from the German Marshall Fund in Paris. You talked about a German lead role. What can the European partners expect from you? Can we expect brave decisions by Germany? Might that mean making compromises when it comes to German industry in favor of American industry, or maybe in favor of the French defense industry? Well, I'm not French myself. Well, you're putting your finger in the wound. A German lead role does not mean that we march ahead and everyone else has to follow. That would be a big misunderstanding. That does not fit with our political or historical identity. It doesn't fit my idea of things either. But Germany and France are the most important players in continental Europe. There's no two ways about it. And there's a certain responsibility responsibility on these countries to move ahead or to take a lead role, but also to act together responsibly and be an example, because if there's controversies, because we can't expect the smaller countries to follow us if we are not prepared to compromise or to stand back in certain issues. And the, well, French national defense industry is very important for the French economy and our private defense industry here too. But the important question for the future, and that brings me back to standardization and other things, what we need is simpler in the sense of standardized weapon systems. And some people find this ridiculous, or maybe it's naive, but the ideal situation was, you know, to say Germany builds the next main battle tank and France builds weapon system X, Y, Z. And we cooperate with the Dutch in this way, etc., without having these huge consortia, these huge groups where everyone just looks at what influence they have and what a supervisory board they sit on. That doesn't bring us further. So we need to get rid of those outdated procedures that 30 years of peace dividend brought along. It's a process for enterprises, politics, but also for society.
Herr Minister, BDSV, ich will noch mal ganz kurz auf
I'm
Ihren
from the
Mindset-Punkt kommen.
BDSV.
Wir
Let's
haben ja hier
come
alle,
back
glaube ich,
to the
Übereinstimmung,
mindset.
dass
You talked about
Rüstung
mindset.
für
I
die
think
Bundeswehr ein Beitrag
we
zum Frieden
agree
ist und
that
Frieden Lebensgrundlagen erhält und damit
Bundeswehr
Nachhaltigkeit
makes a contribution
schafft.
to
Das sehen aber
peace,
viele
and
in
peace
unserem Land nicht so. Also die Banken, der
is the basis of
Finanzsektor
life
sehen
and
das
creates
anders, wenn
prosperity,
sie oft
but
zu ihrer
others
Bank gehen und
see
wollen
that
einen
differently.
grünen
For example, if you
Investmentfonds
want to
kaufen,
buy a
dann steht
green
da
investment
regelmäßig
fund at
nichts
your
mit
bank,
Waffen und nichts mit Rüstung.
regularly
Selbst
says
in der grünen
nothing
Bundesanleihe
with
steht,
weapons
dieses
and
Geld
nothing
nicht
with
für
arms.
Rüstung,
And in
Verteidigung,
the
aber
federal
Kalkül
bonds,
und
it also
Glücksspiel.
says, well,
Frage,
none
was
of
können
this
Sie
will
als
be used for
Bundesregierung
gambling,
machen,
arms,
damit
etc. What
der
can you
Finanzmarkt,
do
oder die
in
EU müsste es vielleicht
order?
machen, aber was können Sie als Bundesregierung
What
tun,
can you do as the
damit
federal
Banken und
government
Finanzinstitute
to
hier eine klare
ensure
Guidance
that
bekommen?
financial institutions and banks get clear guidance?
Da wir hier über
Well,
Unternehmen reden,
we're
über
talking
Banken reden,
about
damit über
businesses,
Rendite und
about
Profite
banks
reden,
and
ist halt nicht unanständig.
profits and return on
Geht's immer um die Frage,
investment.
das attraktiv zu machen.
It's all about
Und ich sag mal so,
making
wenn
that
der deutsche Staat
attractive.
seine
And there's
Ausgaben
nothing
in
wrong
Rüstung
with
und
that.
Verteidigung in den nächsten
So
Jahren
if we
erkennbar hochfährt und schon
increase
hochgefahren
our
hat,
spending on
dann wird
defense
natürlich
in the next
dieser
years, and we've already
Wirtschaftszweig
started doing that,
an
then this
Bedeutung und an
branch or this
Attraktivität und
sector of business will become
gewinnen.
more
Und wenn er
attractive.
da gewinnt, dann wird es auch
And
attraktiver für Banken, da bin ich
If
ganz sicher.
it becomes more attractive, then it will
Zweifel kann man
become more
darüber auch
attractive for
Gespräche führen.
banks, I'm sure.
Es
And
geht
I
insgesamt
guess
den
we
Mindset.
can
Natürlich,
discuss
und seien wir
that,
doch
but
ehrlich, in den
indeed it is
30
about
Jahren,
mindset.
ich kann
And
da meine eigene
in the
Partei
last
und andere gar
30
nicht von
years,
freisprechen, war
and my
Rüstung,
party is guilty
ich will
of
nicht
that
sagen,
too,
bäh, aber
but
jetzt nicht besonders
defense
sexy.
industry wasn't
Das war ja so.
disgusting, but it
Und das ist
wasn't
ja auch
particularly sexy
nachvollziehbar
either.
gewesen, weil wir haben über
And
alles
that was
Mögliche
understandable
gesprochen, aber nicht
because we
über
talked
die
about so many
militärische
different
Bedrohung in
things, but not
Europa
about a
oder
military
darüber,
threat
dass wir zu
within Europe.
Deterrence and Defense
We
zurückkehren
didn't talk
sollen.
about
Für mich
having
war
to
das bis vor
return to
wenigen Jahren
deterrence
oder
and
bis vor 2
defense.
Jahren
Until
auch
2 years
unvorstellbar.
ago,
Ich
it
habe,
was
wie gesagt, bis zum Fall der Mauer
unfathomable
30
for
Jahre
me. I
damit
couldn't
gelebt.
imagine that.
Und
And
als
I lived with,
Bundeswehrsoldat auch noch in der
you know, I lived
Aber es ist
in,
jetzt wieder da
with,
und das ist, ich habe heute in einer
with a
Diskussion
different
auch gesagt,
mindset for a long
ich bin
time.
sehr beeindruckt,
And it was
wie
said again
schnell
today
die
that
deutsche
I'm
Gesellschaft
very
in großen
impressed by
Teilen diese
how
180
quickly
Grad mentale Wende
the
bewältigt hat.
German public has
Einzusehen,
achieved
dass
this
das eine neue, alte,
180-degree
bekannte
turn.
Herausforderung ist, mit der wir uns beschäftigen
I mean,
müssen.
in some
Und dass das
ways
eben
it's
auch
an
bedeutet, dass wir uns
age-old challenge,
verabschieden
but
müssen von
it
einer Welt,
means
die
we
nicht mehr
have to say
existiert. Und
goodbye
dass das
to a
eben auch
world
bedeutet,
that
dass wir
no
Geld für
longer
Dinge
exists, and it
ausgeben,
means that we need
für
to
die wir es
spend
lieber nicht
money
ausgeben
on things that
müssten
we'd
oder
rather not
müssten,
spend
um es
it
mal so
on
zu
or not
formulieren.
have to spend
Aber
it
es führt
on.
gar kein Weg dran
But there's
vorbei.
no way
Und das muss
around
klar
it,
sein.
and
Und das ärgert
that
mich,
needs
ich
to
sag's
be
offen, auch wenn ich ja
clear
als
and evident.
Verteidigungsminister begeistert davon
And,
sein müsste,
you know,
wie viel Milliarden ich
me,
jetzt ausgeben kann
as
für
a defense minister,
Rüstungsgüter.
I should be excited
Aber
about
ich will
having
das
so
Geld
many
auch lieber
billions to spend
ausgeben für,
on
wenn ich
defense,
könnte,
but
für
if I could,
die
I
Bekämpfung
would
der
prefer to
Klimakatastrophe,
spend it on the
Verbesserung unseres
climate
Bildungssystems,
catastrophe, on
für
improving
soziale
our
Leistung
educational
oder für
system, on
eine
social
wirklich effektive
services,
Entwicklungshilfe.
on
Aber
effective
das Leben ist kein
development
Wunschkonzert und
cooperation.
diese
But
Herausforderung steht
yes,
jetzt ganz
it's
gerade
not
ganz
like
oben
that
auf der
in
Agenda.
life, and this is now the top of the agenda. Rike Frank. Thank you, Ulrike Franke from the European Council on Foreign Relations in London. I wanted to talk about European cooperation. What you just described sounded a lot like plans for the future. What does it look like in practice? How often do you have exchanges with European colleagues? Because we were in the situation that after the financial crisis, we all reduced our military in an uncoordinated way. What are we doing now? Are we building up in an uncoordinated way again? Do the French find out from the Zeitenwende speech that we want to buy F-35s, etc.? Or how is this working? Well, this week we met as defense ministers in Brussels, NATO, but on the sides we had lots of bilateral meetings where we discussed these questions. I've had exchanges with my French colleagues, Sebastian Lecourneau, 3 times, the same with my Dutch colleague, and of course we talk to each other. And within the brief time that we have available, and I have no illusions about that, it's all about replenishing the stocks and becoming operationally ready again. We can't do everything at once now. We can't support Ukraine with everything that we have and can get in the short term and change and reform the system in Europe. Those need to be subsequent steps. And if you say it sounds like plans for the future, then yes, that's true. We talk about the near future and the present, and then we talk about what needs to happen in the years to come. And that's what I mean with setting the tracks for a path in the future. We won't be able to get everyone on board, but well, that's how it is. I hope that all the big players will be on board. That would be important. And then everything else, well, we need to see what happens. It's uncharted territory, to be honest. This is terra incognita. We need to slowly move forward into a world that seemed to be a thing of the past. The gentleman over there, and then gentleman there.
Matthias Gebauer vom
Spiegel Magazine.
Frage, die ausnahmsweise nichts mit Knarren und Kanonen
I
zu tun hat.
want to ask a question that has nothing to do with weapons.
Dass Sie sich als Innenminister damit auch schon auseinandergesetzt haben.
It's something that you worked on as the Minister of the Interior. We now have these investigations about the BND spy, the intelligence service spy. So he was used to work in the Bundeswehr. Is it acceptable to you that Bundeswehr soldiers have take up an office in the AfD party, the Alternative for Germany party? How should people, how do you want to deal with that? Well, in 2013, I wanted to ban the NPD party, the very right extremist party, but the Office of the Protection of the Constitution was at the time clearly said where the red lines were for parties. So the red lines for parties, so what was still a constitutional okay and what wasn't. The NPD party always crossed that line, but they did not meet the criterion of being dangerous. They were not dangerous. The AfD party, well, it's currently not subject to procedures for being banned. I don't like that, but, well, parties that are not banned can participate in democratic elections. So as far as I know, public administrative law, if you belong to a regular party, you cannot be subject to sanctions. That's not possible. And that's not decisive either. What's relevant is the public statements that these people make, or on social media, in public events, etc. Like that policeman from Lower Saxony that we suspended from service because they had
ohne langes Federlesen. Und das wird auch mit jedem Soldaten passieren, der sich so äußert.
Bad language against the German state on several demonstrations, Querdenker demonstrations, or people who have some items that are not allowed, you know, that's something that you can use in order to prosecute people or get a handle on them. But it's something that we've been looking at very closely. On my second day in office, I worked with the responsible Director General because for us it's very important to monitor the situation very closely if such cases occur.
Timothy Chan, Hertie School, and
teacher from the Hertie
EU project for enhancing security cooperation in and with Asia, which is funded also by the Auswärtiges Amt. My question is simple. What do you see Germany's role and consequently the European Union's role in the Indo-Pacific, especially with ASEAN and Southeast Asia? Especially in the latest Southeast Asia ASEAN survey report, there's this question that says that asks respondents, in a Sino-US tension, which third party would you like to hedge against these two countries? And the European Union comes up top in a survey.
I hope I understand you correctly in your question. Germany's position is quite clear. We stand by the policy of one China. We see the interests and we see the development with concern in the Indo-Pacific. We see the role of the United States and the interests of the United States in that region. And of course, we stand with our allies, and that means, especially in that case, with the United States. And still, we won't be able, and I think nobody expects that, we will not be able to take an active role in a conflict in the Indo-Pacific. What we can do is assistance in any case and in any way. And therefore, it's, for example, very important that we exercise together to show presence, to show solidarity and understanding in that issue. But a military intervention by German troops, I would rather not see in the Indo-Pacific. But assistance, solidarity, support for sanctions and political actions in the UN and otherwhere, every time.
Der Herr da drüben und dann Claudia.
The gentleman in the back and then Claudia Major.
Ja, danke schön.
Thank you, Minister. I'm Mr. Müller from Hensoldt. Many people know me because I tend to ask uncomfortable questions. Please go ahead. So first of all, thank you very much. We as the defense industry are ready. We are going ahead and we are starting production. Thank you for the cooperation, but the question is still unpleasant. So once we have delivered, we don't have the personnel, we don't have the service members. So do you intend, together with the other ministers in the cabinet, to think about the next questions? You addressed it. We need closer ties of our population to state institutions. Have you thought about what we call, quote-unquote, the social year for both men and women, where they dedicate time to this date? And would it be conscription, maybe? I talked about that recently in an interview, and the question at the time was how I felt about the suspension of conscription, and I talked about that. And the second question that didn't appear in the interview was this: how do I feel about the obligatory service, as we call it? And both questions were summarized. So a lot of people in this question, the answers were summarized, and people thought I would want to reintroduce conscription, but no, it would cost so much money, material, etc. And reintroducing conscription wouldn't help us. And this is why we know why it was suspended, because we had two extremes. Some people wanted this many months, and other people wanted another lower number of months, and that wouldn't make sense to make a compromise here, and so suspension was voted for. And so the general obligatory service, setting aside constitutional constraints that would need to be discussed, aside from that, I feel a discussion would be helpful with a view of what I just outlined, this distance that parts of society feel from their state is something I don't like. I've never understood why, for example, we no longer visit schools with the Bundeswehr. The police has been doing this for decades quite successfully. They have a great reputation. Becoming a police officer is a dream job for many boys and girls. Working as a firefighter or disaster relief people, you know, the people need to be present. They've helped in the Ahrtal after the floods, and that's important. And discussing this, just discussing this, can change that. Whether we introduce that, you know, that needs to be the result of a discussion and debate. But the entire generation that is concerned here needs to be involved. Both you and I, and you can tell from our faces, we are a bit older, and I feel some hesitation when it comes to talking to a generation that grows up in a more insecure world and just putting this burden on them just because I can. And this is why I think that this is a societal matter, a social question that needs to be addressed in a well-balanced manner with a very open mind. Let me add another question. So if that's the case, if that's true, how can you make the Bundeswehr more attractive and to solve the personnel, the HR issue that you have that will become more difficult and severe over time due to demographic developments in order to get a handle on this? So by the end of your term, you're not in a position where you need more personnel because you're still lacking some. Well, nobody in Germany, and I think this applies to many other countries as well, becomes a police officer or a soldier because they earn so much money. I think you can see that in the Bundeswehr and the police forces. If you join them or pursue a similar career, you follow an internal calling maybe. It sounds very devoted, but people want to provide for security of other people, and those people who do these jobs don't do it for the money. But what you need to find this job attractive, being a police officer or a soldier, in order to stay in this profession, you need appreciation for the job. And with the police, we have achieved this over the past decades. We have reasonably high numbers of applicants. People can do a BA program, and with the Bundeswehr, partly, I think this applies as well. But our task is now to make the Bundeswehr attractive. So we have voluntary service personnel, and we need a perspective for these young men and women so that after their term is up, their enlistment term, that they can still stay with us, or they can work in professions that are similar to the military. We need to advertise more to attract women, many, many more women, and also we need to attract people with a migration background. But after all, it all boils down to attractive working conditions. A simple example, if we tell a young man or woman today, you know, join the Bundeswehr, and they come to the barracks and they don't even have Wi-Fi. I'm sure that doesn't even exist in the Bundeswehr. They will have, the barracks have Wi-Fi. I'm joking, you know, I know this can be an issue. Then if that happens, you don't win over those people. You need a Bundeswehr that is prepared in a way that a young person in the 21st century feels appreciated. And that includes so many aspects. It starts in training and the perspectives you have, and you need good equipment and appreciation. Claudia Major now. I'm Claudia Major from the Stiftung Wissenschaft und Politik. You just talked about, and I quote, the positive changes you want to implement and launch. And then you talked about old structures, and simply put, you could say if you just have a bit more money and throw this at your old structures, that won't help. Yeah, that won't work. Yes. And so you cited an example. Planning and procurement. What are the other examples? What are the other aspects where you want positive change? Yes, I would like to do you this favor, but I do not want to make the people angry that work in my ministry. I don't want to address this in public right now. I first want to make and share first ideas within the ministry and have those being elaborated on. It wouldn't be in the sense of my understanding of leadership to share these ideas and aspects now, but you will learn. You will hear about that. Don't worry. Minister, thank you so much. Thank you for being available to us. Thank you for answering my questions, for discussing with us. I thank the audience for joining us tonight. This event, we have 42 more seconds. Be quiet, Thomas. Let me finish. So this event was booked out within 2 hours, so you can see how interested people are in you. Well, nobody has anything going on a Saturday night, right? Yes, of course. I'd be very happy if you came back next year again. And I wish all of you a wonderful evening, whatever it is that you want to do. Have a wonderful weekend. Thank you. I also wish you a great weekend. Thank you very much.